Question for you. If Portland is such a dumpster fire, why did Travel and Leisure just name it one of the top places to visit in 2025?
Let's talk about it.
Let's go. Hey everybody, my name is Aaron Cullen. This is Brandon Cullen. Together, we have a real estate company right here in Portland, Oregon. Now we're here in Southeast Portland, and boy, what a video we got for you guys today. Okay, I mean, this is actually really exciting because if you've been paying attention to any of the news, and if you don't live here, you've probably seen all the bad press it's been getting.
Yeah, so that's what we really want to get into today, is contrasting what the zeitgeist has been saying about Portland over the last few years with what's really happening right now. This is honestly so redeeming in a lot of ways to have Travel and Leisure name it one of the top places to visit in the world in 2025, ranking up there with places like Fiji, Rome, Portland, you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked just as much as you guys might be shocked on this list.
And you're pro Portland.
I love it here, which actually just kind of makes sense as I was kind of reading the article. We're going to share a lot of these top reasons why it made one of the top destinations to visit in 2025, and what are the kind of the misnomers that it's been painted in the media over this last several years. And then we're going to give you some counterpoints to that, what the real facts are.
Obviously, we want to talk to people who are interested in moving to Portland. So if it's a great place to visit, chances are it's also a great place to live.
Yeah.
And I think one of the really interesting things about this article is that what they were focused on is the overall vibe of a destination. So it wasn't necessarily looking into those like top niche tourist hotspots. They were assessing what's the overall feeling there. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about Portland in that regard. We're not talking about just like one little thing about Portland that people tend to like. We want to get into like, what is the overall feeling here? And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that Portland, the way that this article was written is that they created a bunch of different categories to rank these destinations. Yep. Things like, beach destination or adventure travel. And where Portland ranked was big city, up there with like Rome, like I said, Marrakesh, Morocco.
Singapore.
Really cool.
Hong Kong.
And I think that is something that Portland is known for, is this urban vibe. But they also talked about the fact that Portland could rank in a lot of different categories. So Portland does have this great urban vibe, but our food and drink here is exceptional. The culture and the creative culture in Portland is something that's really special. And then also nature.
Definitely can't forget that one. I mean, nature is just a huge part of Portland. And I think what people think of, the Pacific Northwest, all the trees, all the trails, access to the mountains, access to the ocean.
Portland has over 250 public green spaces. I think in the big cities in the US, it's ranked like 12th for access to public parks and green spaces.
In the city of Portland, and I did another video on this, where the city has over 300 parks, like city parks, 300. So it always is ranking up there, like in the top 10 for the amount of parks.
It's also a haven for cyclists. So if you're into cycling, bikers, bike commuting is huge here. Yep. People riding their bikes to work.
We basically more than double. We're like the number one spot for being able to commute to work and having the most commuters to work. Like number two is like half of the percentage. So, before COVID, we were up at like 7% of commuters, and then it had gone down to like 5.5.
One of the reasons we really wanted to talk about this is to contrast it with what the public image of Portland has been over the last few years. It's interesting. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking with women from Toronto, Chicago, all over. And one of the women, I think the woman from Toronto, asked me, how is Portland? And the intonation of that question is like, are you guys okay over there?
Yeah, and she kind of whispered a little bit, like, how are you guys?
Like, yikes. And I said, Portland is fine. And then we had a deeper conversation about it. So let's talk about some of what the press has said about Portland. And to be fair, some of this was rooted in fact. Yeah. In, especially during the pandemic, 2021, 2022.
Yeah, a lot of it is no longer the case, and we've made a lot of progress in kind of combating, that bad image that Portland has. So that's what we're excited to share with you guys. Okay, the first one we want to talk to you about in the news. This is probably one of the biggest ones of the image problem that you've heard about with Portland is the lawlessness, the crime, that there's riots going on all the time in Portland. Houses are being burned down. This is the real like dumpster fire image that I feel like Portland has gotten. And
yeah, that it's just like every corner.
yeah, and that we're defunding the police. So that's the real image part that Portland has been getting, that it's just lawlessness.
There was a time during the pandemic and after where the crime did increase, especially in certain pockets of Portland.
Yep.
So that's something that's important to talk about is when you talk about Portland, obviously the Portland Metro is a big, diverse area. And so there were smaller towns and suburbs around Portland that did not ever feel the effects of this at all. But then there are neighborhoods closer into the city and in downtown that definitely did see a spike in crime during that time.
Yeah, and so there definitely was a spike in crime, and this is part of the image that Portland, it's not true anymore. And this is fitting too, because this whole thing's blocked off. It's like, hell, riots are going on. We got to board up all the houses, and during the pandemic, yes, there was a lot of things boarded up. There was a lot of businesses that shut down, but now it's definitely a different picture. So give us a few stats of what's
So there's
like now.
been a huge reduction in gun violence, 35% reduction in gun violence since 2022. And there's been a reduction in homicides, I think almost 20% reduction, as well as a reduction in non-fatal shootings between 2022 to 2023. And then that decrease is continuing today.
One of the other negatives is that Portland has been painted as this radical, political, left-leaning city that has all these failed initiatives that were just extreme progressive initiatives that they passed. And that's why Portland is a failure.
Right. A lot of the complaints about Portland were very politicized and pointing to ineffectiveness of local city government. And again, sometimes there's like a kernel of truth. And I think there was certainly a time in 2020, 2021 where the majority of the residents of Portland felt like our leadership was not being super competent in this regard.
And I would agree with definitely some of the things that were happening for sure. There was definitely missteps. So again, that was rooted in some truth, but then really taking I think to the extreme.
Right, and Portland was being held up as an example of why progressive policies don't work, which was just taking it a step too far. When actually there were initiatives in the city, especially around gun violence prevention and ceasefire initiatives that were very effective and have decreased gun violence by almost 40%, especially in some of the more underprivileged communities, and especially with community outreach targeting young Black men, providing counseling and support in order to give them different opportunities. An example of a really effective initiative was the city's Project Ceasefire, which showed a decrease in gun violence of 38% decrease among young Black men, and really showed the effectiveness of community-based interventions. So, you can give examples of where the city leadership was ineffective, but today in 2024, we also have examples of where the leadership has stepped up and made a positive difference.
And those are policy changes that they've instituted since crime went up, during the COVID era, how Portland has really made this very active over the last several years to combat a lot of the negativity. And I think a lot of the residents in general, have say, hey, we've had enough. We love this city. We love living here. And so there's definitely been a reshuffle too of a lot of politicians, like on the local level and the city level. So I think those are all great things. And there's a lot of great community supportive programs. Another one of the negative aspects that you've definitely heard in the news is the homelessness that's out of control. And yes, this was definitely true during COVID. During COVID, we got up to about 11,000. We kind of peaked around 11,000 homeless people in the city of Portland, which was a huge jump from just even a couple years before that. And that was also exacerbated by the city allowing the use of tents, just camping anywhere, during COVID. And I know it was extreme times, but they allowed tents to be everywhere. And that also coupled with the decriminalization of drugs at around the same time, it was just a really bad combination. And so you had a lot of homeless people just openly, doing drugs that were kind of, in despair or had mental issues or both. And so it was a real issue, but that's not how it is today.
And just to put a finer point on that, it was a real issue and not just isolated into like inner city neighborhoods, but it was spreading into, neighborhoods throughout Portland where families are trying to raise young kids and are feeling very uncomfortable that there are people using drugs like out on the corner.
Yep.
In front
a lot of the parks were kind of taken over,
Yes.
In more urban residential areas
Right.
where they hadn't before.
Right, and so you were starting to hear people who had long loved Portland and lived here and planned to raise their families in, these northeast and southeast neighborhoods suddenly feeling really uncomfortable and vocal about that,
Yep.
understandably.
Yeah. And so that's definitely not the case today. So give some examples of how that has changed.
Obviously, the city knew that they had to do something about that. Like that was never going to be allowed to continue. And so there have been a number of action plans put into place to increase housing opportunities for the homeless, including increasing housing units, increasing shelters. A response action plan that was put into place in 2024 is intended to house an additional 2,700 homeless people by the end of 2025, along with building up to 1,000 more units to house homeless people. So,
And that's like an increase of like 40% of the homeless shelters,
Right.
That we currently have.
and that's just one more sizable effort, but throughout communities, the effort to provide like job opportunities and education, like school to work programs to really get at the root of the problem. I think you can see that in the city just
Absolutely.
all around.
Plus they have now reversed the policy, so camping is now illegal. You're not allowed to camp anymore. So like all these things kind of coupled together, it's made a huge, huge difference. You don't see, hardly any encampments. You'll still see some like near some overpasses and things like that, but the police are now more active on clearing them because now it's not allowed.
So we really didn't want to sugarcoat what those problems did look like a few years ago. I think it's important to be honest because we have clients reaching out still today from other places that ask this question. Like, are there areas to avoid? Where is safe? And so we want to be honest with people. But I do think this article and our experience here locally has shifted so much, even in the last year, I would say. We were talking to some friends over the weekend and they were getting ready to go downtown to the Portland Art Museum with their 6-year-old daughter. And our friend was saying, I feel so much more comfortable taking her down there and walking around downtown now or getting down there again. And that's just such a relief that, we all want to be in the city again.
Yeah, and I was in the city a lot just, this last summer, of 2024 and 2023. Like every summer, I'm downtown a lot for work, being in the real estate game, and there's a lot of condos down there. There's some great areas. The Pearl District is one of my favorites, and I've just seen the change. And so the news definitely just doesn't keep up with it. And the fact that Portland has made one of the best cities to visit for 2025, and it's the overall grading on the overall vibe that's right now, that's current. And to me, I just want to share this with you guys because that is really the feeling here, is that it's not this lawlessness, dumpster fire, crime everywhere, because it was definitely thrown way out of context. We did have our problems, there was an increase of crime, but it was already a lower crime city to begin with. And so it's all in context when comparing it with other cities.
Portland became a scapegoat, I think, for what was going on in a lot of American cities during the pandemic. And so to see that revival here locally is just makes us so happy.
So in wrapping up, if you haven't been to Portland, if it's on your list, come out, come for a visit, and reach out if you're thinking about moving here. If you guys have any questions about housing, I'm a local agent. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I got a link right down there. If you guys want to schedule a Zoom, go ahead and do it.
And if you're coming for a visit, reach out and let us know what you're into, and we can make some recommendations for your trip that suit, your interests and your hobbies. Because that's one thing about Portland, is that it's got so much going on creatively and culturally that whatever you're into, like if you love cooking, I will send you to a cookbook store that has nothing but cookbooks and is so charming. Like whatever you're into, Portland has something for that. I tried to take you there today when I wanted to go to Alberta, but it was too far for you.
All right, guys, well, if you enjoyed this video, stay tuned for the next one coming up right now.